Right, so first of all, I'm not going to make any apologies for the fact that this is not going to be a short video. There are some videos already on YouTube that talk about SSL and try and give an introduction. I actually found that there wasn't one that really described everything in a way that left me at the end of it in no doubt about how it all works. So my style is going to be potentially repetitive. I'm going to try and hammer the basics home. If you probably don't need that, you probably don't need to be watching the video. So I'm going to try and explain things in sort of layman's terms so that anybody can understand it and follow through from slide to slide. So basically, let's kick off then. So why do we need HTTPS or SSL? So HTTPS is the secure version of HTTP. HTTP is the protocol, if you like, the message format between clients and servers on the internet. So when you go to your banking website or to any website in the world, the chances are you're going to be using an HTTP protocol, which again defines the format and the exchange of messages between the client and the server. So the only difference between that and HTTPS is that the S stands for secured, and therefore what we're saying is that instead of a stream of characters going over the internet in unencrypted format, we are first of all going to encrypt them so that the string of the sequence of characters that's sent over the internet is going to be essentially scrambled and completely indecipherable to a rogue in the middle here who might be trying to get information about the traffic between these parties. So if we take this example here, I'm going to use this guy Humpty Dumpty as the sort of the client who's trying to interact with his bank over here, right? So normally, the Humpty would sit at his bank, and let's say the bank are not using HTTPS; they're just using HTTP. So he would go to HTTP my bank, whatever the URL is, and then there might be a login form, and he might enter his username and password in that login form. And when he hits submit, those details are essentially going to be sent over the various nodes on the internet. First of all through his router, then through to the ISP, and then various points through the internet until it actually gets to my bank. Now the point is, without HTTPS, the sequence of ones and zeros effectively, because all traffic over the internet and indeed in any computer is represented by ones and zeros or on and off. But without encoding them with HTTPS, the format of these ones and zeros is in a way that anybody can listen in on any of these nodes on the internet and easily read that this particular sequence here, for example, represents this username. So that's obviously a very dodgy scenario and one that we want to avoid. So I just made a note down here. So without SSL, the data is sent a stream of ones and zeros, and the man in the middle, that's a very common term in this kind of, God, I don't know if you can hear the wind, it's unbelievable. The man in the middle can listen and interpret the text, right? And he can potentially even modify that and then send it on its way. So that's why, so what we need to do is find a way to actually take this data here that's being entered by Humpty Dumpty and basically scramble it in such a way that this guy in the middle cannot understand at all what's going on, but obviously in such a way that the bank, when they receive the data, can unscramble it and interpret it correctly. Okay? So in a nutshell, we need to encrypt the data between Humpty and the bank. So let's take computers out of this whole scenario for a moment and use an analogy. It happens to be quite a sort of a bulletproof analogy. So and it might actually make the concepts much clearer. So let's say that the Humpty Dumpty and the bank in long before computers came along, they were engaged in some business which required frequent exchange between Humpty and the bank of Humpty's passport, right? So let's, I don't know what scenario that would happen. Normally they would just need it once, but let's say they needed a way let's say over the next 3 months the bank needed Humpty's passport, and they would need to check it, do some processing, send it back to Humpty. Then Humpty might go on holiday for a bit, but the bank might need it again. So how do we find a way to send Humpty Dumpty's passport to the bank securely without any chance of anybody in the middle stealing that passport? Okay. Well, effectively, and also, by the way, avoiding Humpty having to go in person to the bank every time. So let's say he lives 500 miles away from the bank. It's a long way, and he doesn't want to have to go there every time. So Humpty Dumpty, what he's going to do is he's going to buy a simple secure chest with a lock and key. And let's say, for example, that is the only mechanism in this day and age that we're talking about. It's the only mechanism that people actually use to put their belongings in and send them via a courier to an ultimate destination. So let's say it's a very standard trunk that is available at the time. So what would happen here is Humpty would buy one of these trunks, and he would actually make a copy of the key, so that he's got one key for himself and one key for the bank to use when they want to open the trunk. So that's number one. Number two, so for the very first time, Humpty would have to take that key himself to the bank and give it to the bank. And the reason is the assumption up here, because the postal or the courier service we're going to assume is corrupt, and that anything that they're transporting, they like to basically take a peek inside or see if they can manipulate it. And when they get keys to deliver, they always take a copy of those keys and keep them for further use. And the reason is because so they have this long chain of keys that they've copied that they're delivering, and whenever somebody sends a locked box, for example, they take their chain of keys and say, oh, okay, well, let me see if any of the keys that I've got open this box, right? So let's assume that it's a very evil, corrupt courier. So Humpty doesn't want to send this key, obviously, by this corrupt courier. So he's going to walk 500 miles in person to the bank and deliver the key to the bank, right? I just made a note there. So nothing sent by the courier or the post is safe unless it's locked up in a secure container, like one of these chests. So Humpty then returns home to his house, right? So he walks back 500 miles, leaves the key that he delivered at the bank, and goes home. So now he just takes that passport and drops it in the chest that he bought, and then he locks the chest with his own copy of the key, and then he sends that chest over that 500-mile road via this evil courier service. And what happens there is that because this box is locked, then the courier can do nothing. He has all these copied keys that he's got from the past that he's trying. He'll obviously try them on this lock, but he won't have any luck because this key has never been sent via the courier, so he never had a chance to copy it. So all the courier can do is say, well, okay, reluctantly, I'm going to deliver this trunk to the bank and collect my fee for delivering it. Right? So the bank receives the locked chest, and he opens it with the copy of the key that Humpty delivered to him. Right? That's no problem. They process their passport, they do what they need with it, and then they lock it back up in the chest with their own copy of the key, and send the chest, not the key, back via the same evil courier service back to Humpty Dumpty. And because Humpty and the bank both have their own copy of this key that locks and unlocks this chest, this channel, if you like, of communication is totally secure. But it did require Humpty to go in person once to deliver the copy of the key to the bank. Right? This analogy describes what's called symmetric encryption. So basically, you're using the same key to lock and unlock the chest, if you like. So if we move on to the next slide. So let's say, for example, Humpty is under house arrest because he's been a naughty boy or a naughty egg, and he's not allowed to leave the house and go to the bank to deliver the copy of the key to the bank. So how would they achieve the same thing? Well, what happens is that there is actually another type of box you can buy, which is much more expensive and much heavier and much more expensive to transport as well. But the cool thing about this box is that it has 2 locks and 2 keys, right? And basically, this box, you use a green key to lock the box, and you use a red key to unlock the box, right? So, and this is called an asymmetric box, we'll call it, right? Now, so the great thing about this is that so because we've got these 2 keys, and one of them is called the public key. Let's just go through these questions. So why is the green key called a public key? It's called a public key because this is the key used to lock the box. So you can never actually be in danger of losing your secure valuables by giving possession of this key to anybody, because this can only lock, it can never unlock a locked box, right? So in actual fact, we can make as many copies of this key as we want, and we can send it to every single evil courier service and every tyrant in the whole world and say, here you go, mate, knock yourself out. You can take this key and do whatever you want with it. And that's why it's called a public key. The private key, this private key, is a different story altogether, right? The private key unlocks the box. So it's very important that only certain people have access to this private key, and that's why it's called private. And we're going to call this an asymmetric chest. Now let's see what this has to do with the Humpty Dumpty who's under house arrest. So let's see how Humpty can actually get his passport securely to the bank without ever leaving the house, right? So first of all, the bank, I'm going to say the bank gets hold of one of these asymmetric chests, and I'm going to say the bank does it because they are the ones who are going to own the private key. So when you buy one of these fancy asymmetric chests, in the box comes the private key and the public key, right? Now the idea is that you, as the owner of the box, you're going to keep hold of the private key and basically never let it out of your hands ever, right? But what the bank does do is basically he's going to send this chest via the evil courier service, unlocked, right, with the public key, and he's going to send it via the courier to Humpty Dumpty, right? So it goes via this way. So the courier basically says, well, I've got an asymmetric box and I've got a public key. The asymmetric box is empty and open. What the hell can I do? I mean, he could if he wanted to just cause trouble and be just a meanie, you could basically just take the asymmetric chest and lock it with the public key just to cause a bit of trouble and maybe have a bit of fun. But he's not actually able to steal anything. So let's assume that he basically just delivers the chest and the public key to Humpty and collects his fee for the delivery, because he's not going to get this courier fee if he delivers a locked chest and a public key. Because that's of no use to anybody. So basically, I also made a note here that, so remember that the courier is going to make a copy of the public key, because he always does that anyway. But he knows in his heart of hearts it's never going to be any use to him. So number 3, so Humpty gets the open empty chest, and he basically puts his passport inside the chest, right? And then he locks it with the public key, right? Which he was sent along with the chest. Now the chest is locked with the passport inside, and he sends it back via the same evil courier service back to the bank. Again, I'm repeating myself, I'm labouring the point, but I want to make it sure it's crystal clear. The courier has nothing to do with this box now. He can't, now it's locked. He still has a copy of the public key, but because the bank has the private key, which is the only key that can unlock the chest, then the courier can do nothing but, again, collect his fee for delivering the box intact back to the bank. So when the box gets back to the bank, who've been holding the private key and never letting it out of their hands, they will open the box, and they will basically find the passport in there, and that is an analogy to describe what is called asymmetric encryption. Right. So quick sip of water. Now, I want to take a slight diversion here, just to sort of extend this analogy to the sort of mathematics, not actually describing what they do, but just to explain that in the real world, where we're not actually using physical boxes, we're going to be using say digital documents or streams of information or PIN numbers or usernames and passwords. Now on a computer, all those assets like documents, photographs that you want to encrypt, or PIN numbers, they're represented as just a number, right? Now, so the mathematical formula to encrypt a unencrypted piece of information, let's call it M, which is just let's say it's your PIN number, right? We want to produce a scrambled value M, scrambled value C, my apologies, from M, and that uses a mathematical function F, right? So in a nutshell, C, which is called your ciphertext, is a function of M, which is your input text, and two other numbers. And those two numbers together, N and E, mathematically they represent what's called a public key, right? And that's highlighted there. Now, when we decrypt, when we want to recover our initial, let's say our PIN number from the scrambled value C, we basically apply the same formula, but instead of using the public key, which is N and E, we basically apply the same formula, but using the private key, which is N and D. The N, by the way, is common to both the public and the private key, but D is, if you like, is your private key, right? So these numbers, N, D, and E, they're basically closely related to each other in a way that they're selected at the time that a public-private key pair are generated. So when we talked about in the previous slide about the bank buying one of these, these asymmetric boxes, which has a public key and a private key that comes with the box, the people who manufacture those boxes have to make sure that they create a locking system where the public key and the private key both correspond together to lock and unlock the same box. And mathematically, this is exactly the same when the mathematical software, which generates sort of these virtual encryption boxes, it has to generate two corresponding public and private keys that have this special relationship between each other, such that when I apply the encryption formula, which is, I'm just going to use the term F. You don't need to understand what's actually going on underneath there. But when you apply that formula using your input PIN number, let's say your secret, with the public key, you're going to get the ciphertext. And when you apply the same function to the ciphertext, but with the private key, you're going to get your original input. So obviously there's a key relationship between those two. So I've just made a note here. So the process of key generation, mathematically, is finding two numbers such that the expression on the left holds true, right? So basically such that this one here holds true. So if I apply the same function twice, I'm going to get the original message back. If this is confusing, don't worry too much. You can leave me some questions down below and I'll answer them. It's not really that important to the overall understanding of the video. And just to sort of hammer the analogy home, so the encryption-decryption formula, F, is analogous to basically the treasure chest, right? The secret message, i.e. the PIN number, is analogous to the passport that we saw in the Humpty Dumpty example. The public key, E, so the combination of those two numbers, E and N, that's corresponding to the green key that locks the chest, right? The encrypted PIN number, so is analogous to the locked chest containing the passport, right? So that's your scrambled PIN number, and then the private key that you use to unlock this and retrieve the original PIN number or passport in the Humpty example, that is your private key, D, right? And that corresponds to these two numbers, N and D, right? And again, so I don't want to go too much into the maths, and I'm sorry if this has sort of not been perhaps as useful or relevant, but it is, at least it might sort of spur you on to explore a bit more. So a simple example here is if we want to encrypt the number 2. So let's say for some reason I want to communicate the number 2 to somebody. Let's say that it's the last digit of my PIN number or something like that, right? So what happens is that if I want to encrypt this number 2, I have to choose public and private keys to do this, right? So the process is listed here. I'm not actually going to describe it. I'm not a mathematician, and that's kind of should go to show you that you don't need to be to kind of understand this stuff. But basically, two public keys have been chosen like this. By the way, they don't depend on what this number 2 is, but they basically just although to some extent the number that you're trying to encrypt has a bearing on the size of the keys that you have to use. But other than that, so they've chosen a public key of 7,33 for the numbers E and N, and a private key of D, N is 3 and 33. And this, remember, we talked about the encryption formula F, right? Which, and said we're not going to describe what is inside that. It's basically a very simple formula. It's basically you take your input number. So basically, it's 2, which is the number we're trying to encrypt. You raise it to the power E, which is 7. And then you take the modulus of that, which is basically the remainder after dividing it by 33, which is n, right? And that gives you your encrypted value, which is kind of weird. So we've gone from the number 2, and we've encrypted it using our public key to create the value 29. Now, the question is, what use is that? Well, anybody who has the private key of D and N, which is 3 and 33, they can basically decrypt 29 to give me 2, right? And the way they do that is simply by, excuse me, let's get the, is basically if I take 29 and I raise it to the power D this time, which is my private key, D, and then I do this the same formula, take the modulus, so divide by 33, and take the remainder, that gives me my original 2. So I think that's a very simple example of how the sort of the public-private key encryption works. This is an example using the RSA encryption algorithm. So again, I did go into the maths a little bit, but I hope we can move forward, go back into the world of Humpty Dumpty. It's a little bit more accessible and more interesting. So, okay, next slide. So if, let's say Humpty has a document, right? Let's say it's let's say it's his credit history, right, or his last 3 months' bank statements, and he wants to basically encrypt these in a way, and then send them over the internet somehow to the bank, so the bank can read them, right? So, as I said, let's say this document is Humpty's credit history, and he wants to send it to the bank because he's applying for a credit card. I don't know if that's a feasible example, but it's a document that he doesn't want to be shared by anybody other than the bank. So he takes this document. That document can be passed through this RSA encryption decryption software on his computer using the public key of the bank, right? Because the bank owns the bank owns the private key, and the corresponding public key has to be used to lock the document in this virtual chest, right? So he's going to take the document, he's going to use the public key to put it through the RSA encryption software, and that's going to generate some ciphertext, right? So just like in the previous slide, let's say instead of the number 2, we're going to use just a big document, right? And the public key is going to be a lot longer, much bigger number than 733, right? But this exactly the same principle applies. They're going to generate some ciphertext coming out of that formula, which is going to be the equivalent of the number 29, right, which is the scrambled value. And then this ciphertext can be sent over the internet securely, right? He could put it on a USB key and send it physically via this evil courier, probably his great-grandson by now, still in the family business. They can take the USB key, deliver it to the bank, or he could email it or any other way, but the bank get the same ciphertext document, right? And then the bank will take their private key, pass that ciphertext with the private key through the RSA decryption software. Remember, RSA is just this particular formula here that we went through on the previous slide. And then, like magic, out comes Humpty's original sensitive document over here, right? So that's an example of how the RSA, we've gone from talking about treasure chests and locks and keys to actually describing how this happens in mathematics and digital assets rather than physical passports. And then an example of how such a digital asset might be encrypted, sent over an unsecure channel, right, and then decrypted at the back end. Now, what are the drawbacks of this, of basically having a situation where the bank has a private key that they keep for themselves, and basically the Humpty Dumpty and everyone else has a copy of the public key for that bank? Well, the main disadvantage is that it only allows the traffic to be in one direction. So let's say that the bank wants to send Humpty's passport back to Humpty, right? He has no way of doing that because Humpty doesn't have his own private key, and the chest that Humpty and the bank were using before can only be unlocked by the private key that the bank have, right? So we could say, okay, well, why doesn't Humpty just buy his own locked chest, right? I've drawn Humpty's little face on the side of that one, and in addition to the bank's one, so therefore Humpty can use this chest for receiving from the bank, and the bank can use this chest for receiving from Humpty. But that's extremely it's extremely sort of inefficient, and these boxes, we're going back to talking about boxes now, but let's say they're very expensive, very inefficient, very heavy, and so basically what we need to do is find a better way to enable Humpty Dumpty and the bank to exchange their passports securely, bi-directionally, in both directions, not just Humpty sending it to the bank, right? And so happens there is a way to do this. Again, this slide, this slide looks a little bit involved, but I'll just take you through step by step what happens. It's actually not too difficult. If you understand the symmetric box, the asymmetric box, that's all you need to know. So, number one, so Humpty is going to buy himself a symmetric trunk, and he's going to make a copy of the key, just like he did in the very first example we looked at, right? Step number two, the bank is going to buy an asymmetric trunk, right? The one with the public and private key, and they're going to send it via the courier along with the public key. So again, we've seen that happen before when housebound Humpty wanted to send his passport to the bank but wasn't not able to get it back. So the bank sends the chest with the public key via the courier. The courier makes a copy of the public key, as he always does, in the hope that one day he'll get a locked chest that is one of the keys on his keychain will open. But and he delivers. The courier delivers the asymmetric chest to Humpty. Now this is where the clever bit happens, right? So Humpty now has two boxes. He has a symmetric box which belongs to him, and with the key that he copied, and he has the asymmetric box that he's just received from the bank with the public key for that, right? So what he does is he gets his passport and he locks it inside his own symmetric box, right? The one that he bought and and made a copy of the key for. He locks it inside there. Then he's going to take this chest and he's going to drop it inside the asymmetric chest, which is much bigger and much heavier, right? And he's going to drop the he's going to drop the copy of his own symmetric key inside that chest along with it, right? Then he is going to lock that asymmetric chest with the public key that's sent to him by the bank. So let's recap. What he's sending back is the asymmetric chest that was sent by the bank that's been locked with the key that was sent by the bank, but inside that box he has put his passport and the symmetric chest and the copy of the key that he made, right? So this package all goes back by the evil courier service back to the bank, and the courier has nothing to do, once again, because it's an asymmetric box and he only has the public key, he doesn't have the private key, so only the bank can open it. So I hope this is not too long-winded, but I also, more importantly, hope that it's actually at least becoming clear, right? The bank gets this asymmetric box. It has the private key, of course, because it was the one in step 2 that actually bought this box and kept hold of the private key. So the bank opens the box with the private key. Now, out of the box comes this symmetric box, which Humpty bought, and a key to open that symmetric box. So the bank opens the symmetric box with the key, and out comes the passport. So we've achieved the goal of getting the passport to the bank securely without any chance of this evil courier in the middle intercepting and getting his filthy hands on it, right? And the great thing about this is that we can now actually get the passport back to Humpty securely, which we were not able to do before, right, in the first example. So how do we get the passport securely, back to Humpty, right? Now, the key point is we do not need that big, clunky, asymmetric box anymore, right? We can throw it away. The bank can basically use it for the next Humpty or whatever, but we don't need it anymore. And the reason is because what we've achieved now is that the bank and Humpty both have a copy of the key that locks and unlocks Humpty's original asymmetric box, which, if you remember, was what we wanted from the very first example. I'm sorry to go back through the slides, but it's just going to hammer it home. In the very first example, we said, as long as Humpty can walk to the bank 500 miles once, deliver the copy of the key, then the bank and Humpty can exchange to and fro as many times as they want. Now, without Humpty having to leave the home, we've achieved exactly the same thing, right? And on this slide, so we'll just go through it. So basically, this box is now a secure channel, if you like, for the bank and Humpty Dumpty to exchange passports, gold coins, whatever secure things they want forever, right? And this guy in the middle, he has no idea. He does not have this public key here at all, right? He does not have access to this. So he has the public key that belonged to the symmetric box. So the asymmetric box, my apologies. But that asymmetric box has now been thrown away, right? So that from here on is plain sailing, right? So the public, the asymmetric box is discarded, and two-way correspondence between Humpty and the bank occurs with the symmetric box, the one that Humpty bought and copied the key for, right? I just want to sort of reiterate one more time. The asymmetric box was only used initially to securely communicate the copy of the key for the symmetric box between Humpty and the bank, right? And the man in the middle never got his hands on this. So how does this extend to our internet example? So this is just a recap from earlier where we said that the original secret document, the one that could not be shared, can be encrypted with the public key through this RSA encryption software, which is the very simple formula we looked at, to create ciphertext, which is the scrambled, unintelligible text. And then that when combined with the private key passed through the same RSA algorithm, will give you your original secret back, right? And then, so this is the asymmetric, and then the symmetric is basically we take our secret document, we use a symmetric key, and the symmetric algorithm. This is a common one is AES. So RSA is a common algorithm for asymmetric encryption decryption, and AES is one you'll hear often used for symmetric encryption decryption. So, and this gives you your ciphertext, and then the same key will, through the symmetric encryption, will decrypt that message and give you your original ciphertext. So we've got two types of encryption going on here, and HTTPS is basically a technical, a sort of a computerized interpretation, an extension of this analogy here that we just went through, which combines symmetric and asymmetric encryption, right? So now, I apologize, I've started to use more handwriting on these slides. I hope you can read it, but I'll probably read it anyway. So what we're doing is we're going to bring these two together, right? So asymmetric encryption, just to make a note, is slow. It's limited in terms of the message size. So the keys you use influence the maximum size of message that you can encrypt. Symmetric encryption is fast, it's efficient, and it can be used on, as big an input message as you want. So if you think of it in terms of those trunks, those actual physical boxes, you can say that, let's say, the asymmetric box can only contain certain types of contents, whereas the symmetric box, the one that has the same key to unlock and unlock, like the simple box, you can put anything you want in there, and it's much quicker to transport, right? So, what's the answer? How do we get the best of both of these techniques? Well, we use asymmetric encryption to share a symmetric key between the parties, and that symmetric key is going to be used to encrypt the actual conversation going back and forward. It's exactly the same as the analogy to go back here with the bank. So first of all, we use an asymmetric box to securely transport a key that enables subsequent communications back and forth forever to be done via a symmetric box, right? So, yeah, so this is the internet equivalent of the housebound Humpty using both the symmetric box inside the asymmetric box, right? Now, so in terms of HTTPS, so that's been a lot about kind of the public-private key encryption. There's been nothing about the kind of the internet and a web browsing, secure or not secure, with a banking session, that kind of thing. Now, I'm not going to go into the HTTP protocol or indeed the internet stuff. I mean, if you're interested, please leave a comment down below. I can do more videos on this type of style. On any topic that that a few people ask for, but essentially, when your browser goes to let's say you hit HTTPS mybank.com login, what happens is your browser on your computer sends a message to the mybank.com server, and it says basically, I want to start a web session with you, but because I've said HTTPS, first of all, we need to establish a secure channel to communicate. So instead of sending ones and zeros over the internet in raw form, like in the very first slide, we're first going to agree some protocols, some rules on each side, so that we can send effectively this data in scrambled format, right? So that's called the client hello. Right, that's the signal from the client to the server saying, "Hello, I want to communicate securely with you, my bank, in this session." Right, so that then the server is going to send a hello response back to the client. Right, and the server at this point is basically saying, right, if we're going to use HTTPS, It's going to tell him some details about what version of the HTTPS protocol that they're using, etc. This is not a detailed description about the HTTPS protocol. I can do a video on it if you want, but I just want to illustrate this is more about the public-private key concepts, right? So the server sends this hello message, and it sends it accompanied by a document called a certificate, which contains the server's public key, right? So the server, which I've drawn over here, has its own private and public key installed on its web server. So just like the bank had its own treasure chest that it bought with a public and private key, the bank's web server has a private key, which is effectively just two numbers, which we saw from that formula, installed on the web server, and a corresponding private key that it communicates and sends out to any client that wants to communicate with that server, right? Just like the bank communicating its public key to Humpty Dumpty, right? So the server sends back this certificate in the response. That certificate is a document. It's a very short document. It's like a few hundred characters, and it includes the public key, right? Now the client at this point basically does some validations on the certificate to make sure that the server is really who they say they are, that the certificate is valid. Now, I'm going to do a detailed session on the whole kind of certificates side of things. And that's going to be the next session. So this is more a primer to see, okay, well, what's the public-private key thing all about, and what's generally the server about. So the server is going to check this certificate. The client, my apologies, is going to check the certificate, check that it hasn't expired, and then it's going to take the public key from that certificate and put it aside and use it in the next step, right? So what happens then is that the client, so that's Humpty Dumpty's computer, right? The guy who just literally wants to go on and check his online banking statement or whatever. His computer, not Humpty, his computer automatically just basically generates a random number. It's called a pre-master secret. And that pre-master secret is encrypted by the client with the server's public key from the server sent in the certificate, right? And then the encrypted pre-master secret is sent back to the server, right? And this is analogous, just going back a few slides, this is analogous to Humpty taking the public key that he owns, that he copied, encrypting it, as in putting it back in the server's box, locking it with the server's public key and sending it back, right? So basically the client, again, generates a random number. I'll explain what that random number does in a second. You might be getting an idea of what it's going to do anyway. It's going to take that random number, encrypt it with the server's public key, right? And then it's going to send that encrypted message back to the server. Now, what happens then is the last step in the kind of the key establishment process. So the client and the server, they both now have a copy of the random number that the client generated. So they both, let's say the client generated the number 45 and encrypt it with the server public key, right? To give a number 3876. The client sends 3876 to the bank. The bank decrypts 3876 with the bank's private key to get the original number 25. So now the client and the server, they both know this random number is 25. They both put this number 25 through a function which is known to both sides, and it's a deterministic function. So effectively, the result of passing that pre-master secret through the function is going to be the same on the client side and the server side. And that number is basically the symmetric key that the client and the server are going to use for all subsequent communications in that session. So I'll just, in step 9, so the client and the server from that point exchange messages within that session, so until the client hits close on the browser effectively, to encrypt and decrypt all the traffic using that shared key. Right? I hope that makes sense. I'll just go over it once more. I guess people who find this very tedious and repetitive will probably have tuned out a long time ago. So just hang on for 2 more minutes, and hopefully you'll have a good understanding of the public-private key thing, and we can build on that to get a really good understanding of how SSL certificates work. Right? So just going over this one more time. So the client sends a request via HTTPS mybank.com to his bank web server saying, because it's HTTPS, I want to create a secure channel, right? The web server has a private key and a corresponding public key installed on the web server. It sends the public key back to the client contained within a document, which is not secret, it's a public document called a certificate. The certificate contains the public key belonging to the bank. The client does some verifications, some other verifications, which we'll talk about in the next video. Then it will also pull out the public key from that certificate and say, right, I've got the public key for the bank. I'm going to generate a random number. In this case, the client generates 25, encrypt it with the server's public key to give a scrambled number, send that scrambled number back to the bank. The bank decrypt that scrambled number with the bank's private key to get 25. So the client and the server now both have the number 25. They both pass that number 25 through a mathematical function, and that function generates the actual public key numbers to use in the communication. From that moment on, that symmetric key, not a public key, that symmetric key is used in all subsequent communications between the client and the server. So the client can go in, check his bank statements, make withdrawals, make transfers. All the traffic going between the client and the server from that point is completely scrambled, and nobody in the middle on any of the nodes on the internet between the client and the server, and there are many, nobody can actually read that information unless they actually have the same asymmetric key which the client and the server worked so hard to establish. So that is really it about public-private key encryption. I hope it was useful. It is only the first in the series. I want to keep it sort of fairly targeted for each video, and also to give people a chance to leave feedback about how they'd like things to be done in the next video, what topics, etc., etc. So in the next video, I want to cover what is the actual SSL certificate, that this mysterious document that the server sent to the client. How does the client know that they're genuinely talking to the bank? Where do these certificates come from? Who originates them? What role do they play? What is digital signature? Because you hear that all the time in this whole thing, and that has digital signatures are really interesting, and then they follow into all topics like blockchain and Bitcoin. So I'll be doing videos on those as well. So if you just subscribe to the video towards the channel, because they're going to be coming up in a few weeks. What kind of ways can the SSL protocol be breached? Because people talk about there's certain types of attacks on SSL or TLS. TLS is the new name for SSL. You might hear that term as well, transport layer security, but they're kind of synonymous. What's the difference between SHA-1 and SHA-2? A lot of stuff in the industry going on at the moment about SSL certificates having to be upgraded from a SHA-1 to a SHA-2 digital signature algorithm. So all that stuff, all the theory about what that actually means, what threats upgrading to SHA-2 mitigates will be covered as well. What implications does this have for clients and servers? So I actually work in financial services on the IT side, and we're industry-wide at the moment. There's a big push to basically switch from SHA-1 to SHA-2 certificates, and it's a bit of a headache. One of the reasons I want to do this is to sort of increase understanding of these basic concepts. So any questions, please leave a comment below or send me a message via the channel, and I'll pretty good generally answering them in line in the comments. If you have any requests for topics to cover in the next video, please also ask me. I've actually bought a Wacom stylus kind of tablet thing, which I'm going to use for the next video. So I'm kind of excited about that. It'll mean you don't have to read my horrible handwriting anymore. So anyway, thanks for watching. I know it's been a long video, but I hope, even though it was probably repetitive, that the basic concept of public-private key encryption have been, and symmetric encryption have been sort of hammered home, and it's a solid foundation. We're going to learn a lot about SSL certificates, and then from there we're going to learn about other things like blockchain, Bitcoin, etc., etc. So thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye.